New Year's Mycospawn. On New Year's Eve, I decided to have another experiment with the Mycospawn of Silocytes, this time with a different cast of friends. This was the group of dudes I hung out with the most when I was 15 and 16, and they embodied all the necessary character dynamics for a clique in a TV show. They longboarded, surfed, snowboarded, and were all early adopters of green power consumption as I was. They were my first green power friends and were all present for my 15th birthday party, one that consisted of green power, game sphere, and night sledding. I don't feel like we ever reached serious philosophical heights those days, but our green power usage was certainly responsible for much laughter, positively altered perspectives, and increased empathy. One friend was named Leaf, a short red-headed Irishman who I likened to a golden lion tamarind monkey. I've known him since we were in preschool, but we weren't always close over the years. Once we both got into green power in high school, however, we became great friends in our collective. Leaf is one of the funniest people I know and is always trying to have a good time. Times with Leaf are about relaxing and making humour out of the simplest things. Close to him was Treedemon, who I met when I was 13. Treedemon was crafty, made jokes, and spoke in a bizarre, inside lingo tongue, much like Leaf. He was taller than Leaf, and his hair was a greyish-brown complexion, much like a sloth. I lived closer to Treedemon than Leaf, so a bulk of my after-school green power ventures were with him. We often had classic times together, listening to music and walking through the woods, as we would talk about trippy ideas and do whatever we could to make each other laugh. There wasn't a rivalry between us, but we shared competing energies at times, or at least challenged each other occasionally. He was a huge fan of what I'd consider clean, cut and dry musicians such as John Mayer, Jack Johnson and Coldplay. I didn't think these bands were bad. They were just rarely the mood I was going for. We had a love of Animal Collective in common, which was more than enough for a strong friendship, but we had our diverging sides. Anyway, I could always rely on Treedemon to say something novel. Then we have Rufflesack and Teton. If Leaf resembled a golden lion tamarind, Rufflesack was a lanky howler. He was bubbly and kind, even if a bit too silly at times, and like Leaf was generally reliable for good vibes. He tended to be impulsive with his speech and actions, but it was usually in good fun and nothing of consequence. I wish I had more to say about Rufflesack, but most of the time his presence blended in with the greater collective, whereas Leaf usually occupied the comic spotlight. Teton was new to our area freshman year and quickly became a staple in our friend group. To continue the primate metaphor, I'd say Teton was most like a chimp. Well-rounded and strong-cored, there was a smoothness to Teton that lent him the favour of some of our town's most sought-after ladies, something we were all at least a little jealous of. Still, we figured if anyone had to be the cool guy from out of town who took all the ladies, he was the guy to do it. He was hip to the green power, and never failed to provide positive spirits anyway. If he was ever too proud about anything, it was never too detrimental to his character, and instead would come across as warranted. So that was the five of us, all consuming some amount of Mycospawn around 7 p.m. on New Year's Eve. There were consistent snow showers that night, but we decided that we'd walk 4 miles to Teton's house as an adventure to have with Silocytes. These weren't the most well-lit roads around town, and much of the trek was roadside without sidewalk. In hindsight, it wasn't the safest thing to do, being a snowstorm on New Year's Eve and all, but we were teenage and had no plans of failing our mission. We found a chunk of darkness just off the road to consume a little green power in, then proceeded with our trek down the empty streets. As it tends to, the green power appeared to expedite the process of great unknown inception, and my visual field began to stir. Silas sights first showed me a row of 5 shadow figures, each rhythmically lurching toward me in unison from far down the road. Though that sounds frightening, it only happened for a few seconds in a flash, with only enough time for me to utter a whoo. The rest of the walk was surely enhanced visually, such as while observing the faded glow of the street lamps against the consistent snowfall. But no sights surpassed the distant shadow figures I had glimpsed. As for the others, I don't recall any of them reporting anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps I had taken more than them, now that I think about it. When we finally made it to Teton's house, I noticed these hanging lights on his porch looked Japanese, and suddenly his whole house looked like a ship from an anime called Spirited Away. I enjoyed this visual exaggeration as I pondered whether they were a part of a reality that our normal perception wasn't capable of. But then I thought, what if the opposite was true and these visions were only fabrications? So long as they weren't malevolent or harmful, I was happy for my pupils to gobble them up. We decided to leave Teton's and walk further down the street to the local gas station, Cumberland Farms, for some snacks. As we walked in, the fact of the Mycospawn still running through our systems became evident as I stared in awe at the colourful display of the vitamin water cooler. I selected the yellow energy, the bright tropical flavours of which always felt nourishing. The colour-coded wall of beverages felt strangely foreign and futuristic, but I carried on and approached the register to pay. The cashier was a middle-aged woman with pointy glasses, pink lipstick, and dry brown hair with roughly cut bangs. After she scanned my vitamin water, she caressed the inside of my sweatshirt sleeve. "I love your sweatshirt. I used to have one just like it," she said, with a little too much forethought. "Thank you," I replied quickly. I made my way to the exit and did all I could to avoid cracking up. It turned out that some people, a year older than us, were parked outside getting gas. After Leaf and Rufflesack talked to them for a bit, it was clear that the girl who was driving was drunk to some degree. She offered to drive us back to Leaf's, to which I was opposed, but my friends went ahead and tried to get into the car. What I can remember can only be described as a failed packing of a tin of sardines, a packing that would not have made it to the shelves. In our best interest, we denied the impaired ride and walked all the way back to Leaf's on the streets. As we made the trek back, we quickly learned how ambitious we had been with our journey. The snow was relentless and was even more cumbersome to walk through on the way back. That whole trip back to Leaf's is now a blur, and I only remember our return when Leaf's mother ushered us indoors as she gave Leaf a light scolding for being out well past midnight. It was too late for any serious talk, though, so we all passed out in the living room. As I rested my head on the musty pillow on the floor, I revelled in the thrill of what we had accomplished. We had just walked around in public under a medium-low dose of psilocytes and had managed to yield some wonder and liveliness. The next morning, we got a Chinese brunch and chatted about the evening's fun, quite exhausted from the trekking. We were up-and-coming adventurers of the great unknown, and we were gradually increasing the firmness of our power processing cores. I was anxious to dive deeper, and soon.